Welcome to the Theotherapist Podcast, where theologically trained licensed therapists share health and healing conversations. Join our host, Dr. Trice Glenn, for conversations about real-life issues from both theological and therapeutic perspectives. Each week, we speak to guiding questions with real-life application, humor, and engaging guests to share meaningful dialogues with our listeners. Let's begin.
Welcome to the 7th episode of the Theotherapist Podcast. My name is Dr. Trice Glenn. I'm so glad you have joined. Today, I have the best guest in the world for our 7th episode of our first season. None other than my very best friend in the world, Millicent D. Parker, LPC. The Reverend Millicent D. Parker, LPC, is joining me today. And of course, I had to end the year on a great note with my best friend. So, Millicent D. Parker, I could tell you loads and loads and loads, but I'm going to try and be legitimate and give you the official bio stats for Reverend Parker. Reverend Parker has a Master's of Divinity as well as a Master's of Science and Counseling from Mercer University. She's a licensed professional counselor, a nationally certified counselor. She works with MAR, which is the Metro Atlanta Recovery Residences. She is a director of the family program there. In addition to that, she's an ordained minister, and I'll let her tell you a little bit more about that background and that integration. But welcome, Millicent Parker, to the Theotherapist Podcast.
Thank you, best friend, Dr. Glenn. Glad to be here. I appreciate you ending the year on a good note.
There you go. You got to. You bring in all your friends, and that's the good thing about the Theotherapist Podcast. I have had a great opportunity to bring in lots of my Theotherapist friends for us just to have some time together, opportunity to share kind of from our different vantage points of this intersection of theology and therapy. I know we all kind of come to this from different spaces and different experiences and different motivations. What we're going to talk about today is the passion areas that Millicent brings into this particular work that we're doing. I know that it's the holiday season. Lots of people are trying to navigate either family relationships or significant other relationships. Some have volatile relationships. Some have relationships that are, in a lull or in a kind of complacency. And so one of the things that we're doing for the month of December is talking about relationships in general. And so episode 5 had to do with building a relationship and deciding whether you want to stay in a relationship. Episode 6 had to do with forgiveness and working through what that forgiveness process looks like. And today, what we're doing to kind of wrap up our relationship series in December is talking about those relationships that take the left turn. We're talking about emotionally toxic relationships. And so before we kind of dive into that, just want to make you aware today's topic for this episode is dealing with emotionally toxic relationships. Many of us have probably interacted at some point in our life with a relationship that was toxic in some way. And hopefully we've gotten to healthier places. But if we haven't, let's talk about it today. I'm glad we have Millicent here. It's definitely one of her specialty areas. But I want to ask her the same way I ask most of my theotherapists, what got you into looking at the integration between theology and therapy?
Well, for me, it's always been like in the back of my mind how I'm living my life, but then also how is either God or church, how does it play out? And so I wanted to just dive more into a better understanding for myself of theology and God and what that looks like in my life, but then also to just for myself get a better understanding of where I am and how all the things that I've learned and experienced in life play out on a day-to-day basis, including my understanding of God.
You know what? I think so many of us can relate to that, right? Who have gotten into this intersection world where we have been people of faith, and then we also feel called to care for others, and we look for that space of intersection. And it sounds like that's what's fueled your desire to kind of integrate the two as well. one of the things that I think some of my listeners may not recognize is that we're kind of off the beaten path when you start getting a dual degree in theology and counseling, that there are just a handful of those that exist kind of in the United States. And so one of the things that I like to bring forward is kind of not only, you know, what led us to kind of walk into this path, but also kind of like, how does that intersect with what we feel kind of called uniquely to tackle? So is there a passion area that you have in therapy that kind of crosses over into your theological realm?
I like to, and I feel like I'm most passionate about working with women, and helping them to find a space where they feel whole, where they feel heard, where they feel empowered. And having experienced the emotional abuse myself, it just basically took me down that path where I had to walk that myself, emotional abuse, and not understanding what it was, or that it was even a thing. And then when I learned more about it and started doing some research about it, I realized that more people need to know, because it's just something that was not really talked about a lot in the African American community at all. And the more I dove into it and looked at research papers and, where people were talking about it, there was very little when I started my journey of it, very little research on it, because as you know, Dr. Glenn, African American people sometimes shy away a lot from research studies, from talking to professionals about what's going on in the home, because what happens at the house stays at the house, right? So that's kind of how I got into that.
And that's one of the biggest challenges I think we face in mental health in its totality, is the stigma of trying to get people to be open and to be honest about what's really going on so that they can get the help, right? Oftentimes it's having the courage to acknowledge that something doesn't feel right about what's going on, or something doesn't feel right about what's happening. And I'm not just going to try to keep it to myself and hold it in. I'm going to actually try to go out and share it with somebody, and maybe somebody has some help that they can offer.
Right. And honestly, in looking at my experiences, but also just reading through a lot of research papers, it was talked more about African American community, or the women in the African American community, seeing those experiences of being isolated or not talking about what's going on in the home as just the way that we were raised. It's just a part of relationships, and you just learn how to deal with it. And so, again, that's what really drove me to wanting to educate more people about what's happening, and that it's not okay, and that we don't just have to deal with it.
Absolutely.
There's help for us, and we can live a healthier life.
And that's why having more forums like today's podcast are really important, because it's going to shine a light for someone who never took the opportunity to kind of delve into what's really going on, what's really happening here. So we have a guiding question behind each one of our podcasts. And the guiding question for today is, how do we know the difference between just having bad arguments and actual emotional abuse, right? Oftentimes, anytime you're in a relationship, you're going to have conflict. You're going to have differences of opinion. You're going to have things that are debated, right? But there's a difference between just having a heated conversation or a heated debate and having emotional abuse, or if there's another verbiage for it, having toxic emotional interactions that are harmful. And so we want to start by just maybe trying to identify, like, what is emotional abuse, or is there a better term for it?
So recently, gaslighting is kind of the term that most people are using with that. And it's basically turning a person on themselves. So they're questioning everything. A person would question everything that you say and turn it back on you, basically blaming you for the things that's happening in the relationship, or isolating you from family and friends, or discounting your thoughts and your feelings, controlling the finances, controlling where you go, controlling what happens in the home, basically making all of the decisions themselves. And that's really kind of what emotional abuse is in a nutshell, because it's bringing you to a place where you begin to doubt your sanity, doubt your intelligence, and doubt your worth.
Wow.
And so if you can and actually I consider emotional abuse to be like the gateway to abuse. Because if you're doubting yourself, if you have no one to talk to, if you have no money, you have no friends, you're totally dependent on this other person, then the next thing that happens is the physical abuse. And so where, if you are aware of yourself and you know who you are and you know you have options, you're only going to accept so much from a person.
Right.
But if they begin to chip away at those things and you're now doubting yourself, you're not trusting what you say, and you're starting to believe that, okay, well, maybe they are right. Maybe I'm not worthy. Maybe I didn't get that right. And then the next thing is the physical abuse or the other mistreatment, and now you're accepting those things. And that just puts you in a bad place for yourself.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest tools used in a control relationship is getting you to doubt yourself, right? Not trust your own process, right. Not trust that you're seeing your own judgment. You're seeing the situation as it is, not trust that other person has responsibility for their actions, but only taking internal responsibility, right? Gaslighting has become such a popular term. I think they added it to the dictionary this year, Merriam-Webster, because it's gained so much popularity. I usually hear it from clients when they start talking about, I'm not sure if my partner is a narcissist, or I feel like my partner's trying to control everything I'm doing. But that term has kind of brought a lot to the forefront where people are starting to evaluate what it feels like to be in this relationship. And they're like, I don't know. It seems like I can never do enough, or I can never be enough in this relationship for the other person to be happy. Is that what you're experiencing too when you run into situations like this?
Exactly. You're questioning everything about yourself. And ultimately, there is nothing that you can do where you'll be enough for that person. But it's more so there's them being able to get you to do what they want when they want. And it's just about controlling you. But in order to do that, they have to chip away at your own self-esteem, chip away at who you are. And in doing so, they begin to control the things that you have going on. And I think for me, it's not even knowing that was a thing. And I'm glad now that with the pandemic, I know a lot of people, ended up being locked up, ended up spending a lot more time with their families than they thought. But also in doing that, it's caused a lot more attention to your mental health and to evaluating your relationships and whether this is something that I really want to be a part of. So I'm thankful for that piece. It is now offering people more opportunities to reach out for therapists and to begin to look at what do I really want for myself. It was a chance for a lot of reflection and introspection. And so I think that's definitely a good thing. And that helps us all to do better and to figure out what we need.
I do. I think sometimes, we can kind of gloss over things if we don't have to focus on it 24/7. But that's one thing the pandemic did, is that you couldn't escape some realities because you were there front and center 24 hours a day. And for a lot of people, and it brought some clarity that something in this is broken, something in this is not healthy, something in this is affecting my mental health, and I need to look at it.
Right. And actually, I was reading one article that talked about for some relationships, there was an increase by about 64% of new experiences of emotional abuse. And I mean, that just shows that people need to work on how they deal with life and how they deal with their relationships and their own expectations of themselves as well as their partners. And so I think that just brought more light to that. And like you were saying, when you're not closed and confined like that, you can kind of skate by and ignore things that's going on, or, you know, just discount that it was not that major. That person didn't mean what they said. But when you're in closed quarters and you have to be with that person 24/7, then it sheds more light on your experiences.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, that kind of leads me to another question. And this one's somewhat controversial because I think there's so many different perspectives to it. But does it really affect someone when they get called out of their name in a relationship? I know that's kind of a sticky widget. There's some couples, you know,
Right.
name calling doesn't really affect them, they say, because they feel like that's a term of endearment. But then there's some situations where how someone says something, or the tonality and the diction and the way that someone says a word out of your name triggers a
Right.
response that feels like abuse. Because if you call me certain words, I'm definitely going to feel the impact of them, depending on who's saying them and how. What are your thoughts about that?
I agree. I think it just depends, because some people are okay with the B word. I am not. And so if you call me that, there's instantly a problem. But for others, if you call them that, they're fine. It just depends on how you say it and the context that you say it in, that they're now offended. I think it's important for each person to decide within themselves what they're willing to accept and not accept. You know, that's just boundaries. And so learning boundaries and that we can have all of them, even in relationships, is important. And because name calling can be an issue. And you have to just be aware of how you feel and how it impacts you when you hear those words and when the person calls you that, or how they say a certain thing, because it may not necessarily be calling you a name, but you may do something and they give you a look, or, you know, other ways that may be condescending. And so for you, you just have to decide what you're willing to accept or not accept, and how that impacts you when those things are done. And so if you're feeling some kind of way, you know, if you're feeling sad or hurt, it's important for you to acknowledge that for yourself, and take a look at that. And I always tell people, when something hurts you and you let the other person know that it hurts you, in a healthy relationship, they'll stop doing that. But in an unhealthy relationship, you tell them that and they'll say either, oh, you're too sensitive, just get over it, things like that. And if you're hearing those type of responses, then that's information for you. And so you have to decide, is this a relationship that I want to continue? Or do I need to consider other options? Because it's important for you, just as it's important for them, that you feel safe, that you feel heard, and that you feel like you're connected to this person in a healthy way.
You know, that's so meaningful, because I talk to so many different couples or people who are in couples, and it's always did you tell your partner? Did you tell your partner that that affects you? Right. And most of the time it's not, well, they should know that affects me. Oh, well, let's use our communication skills. If you can communicate to your partner, this has an impact, then now you both have some accountability, because you both have said this is something we don't want in our relationship. Now, if your partner persists in doing it, you need to look at that. You need to, like you say, recognize that that means something. When your partner recognizes that this hurts you or this affects you, and they persist in doing it.
Exactly.
My antennas.
And you're right that people, and so each person has to then decide that they are going to take a minute and evaluate the situation, evaluate the comment, evaluate the relationship. Is this something that I can be okay with? Does this hurt my feelings? And not just go either into an argument or not talking or whatever they do as a response to that hurt feeling. It's important for each person to stop and take a look at, well, why does this hurt my feelings? What is that about for me? And then from doing that, they can then approach the other person and have a conversation with them. Because, I mean, sometimes a person can actually be overly sensitive, and that's their stuff. But then there are other times where it's the other person and what's going on with them. And there needs to be a conversation about that.
Right. And finding that space
on
in
both
the middle.
sides. Right. Exactly.
But
there can be some that where they're not aware that it's hurtful. And so that's why it's important to have a conversation.
This is touching on so many different other relationship skills, communication, boundary setting, having empathy for the other person and what they're going through. All of those different things seem like they come to bear on whether the relationship can try to walk toward a healthy path or if it's headed toward a more toxic path.
Right. And you also have to look at, okay, am I having to compromise and accept a lot in this relationship and, discount or talk out or talk away, or I'm trying to find the right word that I want to use, what the person is saying? Am I doing that too often? Am I looking to give them grace too often? Because then that's an issue as well. Are you compromising all the time? Then that's something that you need to look at and consider as well.
Are you always making excuses? Yeah. Are you always making excuses for, them doing something or them not trying to make a change, them not trying to make a more healthy environment for you in the relationship in any way?
Right. Because it really is. It's both ways. It's not you doing all the giving and they're doing all the taking, or you trying to take everything and get from them. It has to be both sides are working. And really, it's not even both sides working 50-50. It's both sides working 100. Learning how to have this healthy person presented in this relationship on both sides. And so there is work to be done on both sides.
How do you integrate or either see kind of spirituality, faith background, theology intersecting at all kind of with this concept of toxicity in relationships?
I see it as basically feeling worthy, because it's whether you feel if you don't feel worthy from this person next to you, do you really feel worthy that God is there for you and that God cares and that God is even involved in your day-to-day, in your relationships? And so I think it's important to start there, to look at that. But then also, do you feel worthy for yourself? Like, are you important? Do you consider yourself to be important? But that still goes back to your spiritual connection. Because I think when I think about it, it's all connected, because the struggles that we have with people ultimately go back to the struggles that we have with God. And
Absolutely.
Whether we believe that God is always there for us, or whether we believe that we can trust God. Because if you say you can trust God, but you don't trust the people next to you, then do you really trust God? Because if you trust God, then you believe that the things that are working, that the things will work out for the relationship that you're having. And then you're also open to whatever it is that you're believing God to lead you to.
Yeah.
And you're trusting that God will put you in, will be there for you and allow you to have healthy relationships. Or am I holding on to this relationship that may not be that healthy for dear life because I don't know if I can get another relationship?
There's been a lot of theological work done around how we project onto God the relationships we've had with others. And, kind of like when you see God the Father and you think about either the father figure or the male figures in your life, or you think about that relationship of what does it mean to have God's love, and you think about it based on the love examples you've seen in life. And, those examples could have been very toxic. They could have been very harmful or very condescending, minimizing, destructive. And that does, like you said, it's going to affect that relationship with God and how you're able to even conceptualize God's love because of the experiences that you've had.
And what I have learned is we can have, our relationships with our caregivers can be unhealthy, and we can see the things that they did to us and decide, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to have that relationship. But what I've learned is if you don't do anything to change that other than making a declaration, you will wake up one day and find yourself in the exact situation that you said that you're not going to be in. Or you're treating your child the exact way that you said that you would never do that. Because we didn't do anything other than make a declaration, I'm not going to be that person. I'm not going to act like that. Well, and like I tell families all the time, there has to be actions behind that declaration, behind that statement, because otherwise you're just talking and you'll find yourself in the very situation that you said you'll never be in. So that's important. And that's why it's important for us to be honest with ourselves about where we are and what's going on in our relationships, and then honestly try to do something about it, which may start with the conversation with ourselves, and then have a conversation with a therapist and make some decisions about what I want to do with my life and in my life moving forward. But it starts with us.
Mm-hmm. And I think so often, once again, I always say it from this word of courage, having the courage to do something different, having the courage to seek help, to get healthier, right? And it does take courage sometimes, particularly if you're the only one in your family or you're the only one in your relationship that's willing to kind of go and get some help. It takes courage to be that one. And I encourage everyone that's listening to us, want to be healthy enough to do it. Want to be healthy enough to seek out whatever's going to help, right? Counseling's not, we don't do miracle work over here, but we do our best to try to journey with you towards you getting to a healthier space.
Right. And so my word would then be intentional. You have to be intentional about what you're doing. And so even if you don't do the counseling to start, do some journaling, do some sitting there and being honest about where you are in your relationships and where you are and what you actually believe and think about yourself. Start there. Be honest about that. I mean, and a lot of times that's hard. That's hard to just sit down and take a real look at ourselves and the relationships that we've been in and our experiences from those relationships. But that's where we start, and that's where we can begin to experience things differently, is when we're honest about where we are currently and doing the work there.
And once we've started that journey of doing the introspection, that self-reflection, and we come to some, real clarity, then that leads to kind of what's next. How much is too much, and what's the sign that perhaps we need to gain distance from this relationship, right? Often, when I talk to folks and they're like, I don't know. And there are other factors like, what will other people think of me if I start to pull away or if I leave this relationship? But I always say, well, what will you think of yourself if you stay, right? Like, what does it do to you to stay in a place where you're not thriving, you're not healthy? And if it's about God, God created you to be a good steward of self. If you're going to leave, if you're going to stay in a place that's not a good steward of being of yourself, then you're causing harm to the self that God made. And so you causing harm to God's creation by staying someplace that God didn't tell you to stay. And so,
And how important are you to yourself? Yeah, it's like, how important are you to yourself? Because we're thinking about the other person and what they have going on or how they feel, or we're thinking about what people will say and how they'll feel about what we have going on. But how will you feel? How important are you to yourself? How important is it for you to feel okay with yourself, to love yourself, to understand yourself? How important is that for you? And a lot of times people, they just haven't taken the time to think about that or to connect with themselves. And I always tell people, your gut is your internal GPS. It's there for a reason. It's there to tell you if you're sad, if you're hurt, if you're angry. Something is going on. Something is going on, and it's not going on outside of you. It's something going on internally. And so that means I need to take a minute. I need to take a minute and figure out what that is for me. Not Bobby, not Susie, not Jack. But what does that mean for me? Even if Jack was the one that said it or did it, I didn't necessarily have to feel the way I felt about what he did or she did. And so they're saying, hey, it's time for me to take a step back and figure out, why does that impact me the way that it does? And from there, we can begin to do things differently. Because it may just be learning how to have healthier communication, or it may be me learning how to do more things for myself, or outside of this relationship, because sometimes we can be enmeshed, and we need to individuate and just be our own person and learn how to do that. Sometimes it can be a little bit different, and we just need to completely separate. But you won't figure that part out until you start with you and use that God-given GPS that we have that's there for us. Because even when we're happy and things are going great, they're saying, hey, look at this. You feel great right now. Do more of this. And then we can take note of that. Because I know for me, like, red is my favorite color, which you know. For the longest, I didn't own anything red. And I was like, how is that my favorite color? I don't have anything red. There's nothing around me that's red. And so I started buying more things that were red. That was my favorite color. And I feel good. I enjoy it. If I'm having like a workshop or something for that day, I'll wear something red because that's my power color. And so I've learned to do that for myself. And so it's important for us to take care of ourselves and to learn how to do that. Self-love, and to figure out what that looks like for you. It's different for us all. And it's just as important for each individual person to take a look at that and figure out what it looks like. I know you can Google it, and there's 100 list of 100 things that's self-care, but each person has to decide and figure out what that means for them, because we're all different, which is a great thing. So.
Wow. So then this is one thing that I'd like to kind of wrap up with and leave with our folks. And that is, I know that we're heading into Christmas. This episode is being recorded in December. And so people are prepared to head home to some family situations that perhaps are more toxic than healthy. And it's different when it's family, because in those situations, it's a little harder to just say, I'm totally going to, distance myself from you folks and just not exist again. I mean, some people do it because it's necessary for them to stay healthy.
Right.
Some people, they kind of make a decision, these are small pockets of time that I'm with people in an unhealthy environment. What would you kind of either suggest or recommend, or even just give some people things to think about if they have to go into these pockets of spaces that feel toxic, or even perhaps verbally or abusive from maybe family members or parents in the next, couple of weeks? How would they maybe navigate that, or what could help?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would start with the very first thing is that, do you have to go to that situation? Do you have to put yourself in that situation? Is that something that's either that important or kind of a make or break? Do you have to put yourself in that situation? Start there. And if this is something where, okay, yeah, I need to be a part of this. I don't particularly want it or like it, but I need to be a part of this. Then think of 2, 3, or 4 things that put you in a positive mood, that help you to feel good about yourself. And do that before, like, hey, call your best friend before you get to the event. Laugh, talk, enjoy that moment, and just be present in that moment. Remind yourself that you can do this thing that you're about to do. Go do that. And then after that, call your best friend back and do a debrief. I call it, and they call it an AA book ending. So you start with a positive moment, you work through what you need to work through with your family, and then you end it with a positive moment. And while you're in the situation with the family member, if you already know that Uncle Joe is going to say something inappropriate or that's hurtful, then you can either dance around, not have conversation with Uncle Joe, or when he starts, you can remove yourself from that conversation or that situation, or you can remind yourself that I don't have to accept anything that he's saying or doing. Let him say what he's going to say, and then take care of yourself. When we already know that a situation is going to be not the healthiest space for us because of either how the person talks or what they're doing, if you already know that going in, then you can just decide how much you're willing to accept. You can decide how necessary is this for me to be a part of. And you give yourself permission to either skip the event, to not have those conversations, to let the people know up front, we're not going to talk about this. I want to talk to you, but we can talk about how the day is going. We can talk about how you've been, but we're not going to have this conversation. And give yourself permission to just be direct. That's important. Just be direct about where you are and what it is that you're willing or not willing to accept. I talk to a lot of parents, especially who they're afraid. Well, if I say this, then it'll hurt their feelings. They'll think that I don't love them, or that I don't want to be in a relationship with them. Well, no, you're actually helping them to understand your boundaries, and you're letting them know that this is important for you and this is what you're willing to accept or not accept. And the more that you practice that, then they start to understand or accept that this is what you're willing to deal with, and they'll only approach you in that manner, or they won't approach you at all. Now, some of us, we're fearful when we think about them not approaching, but if they're not healthy for you, and if they're always negative, and if you feel worse after having conversations with them, then that, once again, may not be the space for you. And you can give yourself permission to create those spaces where you thrive, where you're encouraged, where you feel loved and connected. Because sometimes family is just not that space. Even though we may want that to be, if we're honest with ourselves, that's just not the space. And so then it's okay to create that for yourself, because that's a part of self-love as well.
Exactly.
And so that's may just be one of the things that we need to do.
I mean, those are just some great suggestions to help, all of us, because everyone has, some situations they encounter in their life where they aren't the most healthy interactions that they could have. Right. And so having these kind of tools that remind us that we have permission, either not to be in that situation, or we have permission to vocalize what our needs are, and hold boundaries in that space.
Right.
We don't have to go to be miserable. Okay.
Exactly.
We have choices too.
Right. You don't have to force yourself to be miserable. Or if this is a situation where you have to be a part of it and you can't get out of it, then remind yourself, I can deal with anything for 30 minutes. I can deal with anything for an hour. I can deal with anything for a day. And then after that, you go and you already have lined up, I'm going to do these 3-4 things when I finish this so that I can get myself back to a healthy space. You do what you have to do for you. But when you start to value yourself and how you feel and your experience, you're more willing to do those things and less willing to accept negativity and unhealthy relationships.
Amen to that. Well, once again, I want to thank, this has been a great conversation. I want to thank my best friend in the whole world, Reverend Millicent Parker, LPC, for coming today and talking with me about emotionally toxic relationships, which is her passion area. I'm not sure if you have socials or a website or anything you want to give out. Is there anything that you want to share with the folks about either how to find you or just what you're working on in the future?
I am looking forward to getting back into presenting about emotional abuse. I've done several presentations about addiction in families. I am looking forward to getting back into that conversation about intimate partner violence or emotional abuse coming up. I do not have anything on tap at the moment. And you know me, I'm not a big social media person as is, but when I come up with things, I'll shoot it to you and then you can let them know. How about that?
Definitely. Just check back on our website from time to time and we'll update information on Reverend Parker.
Yes.
Just as a reminder, our website is the Theotherapist at thetheotherapist.com. There you can find out more information on our podcast as well as bio information on all of our guests who have presented on the podcast. And you can see the YouTube videos there, and you can get links to all of our podcast portals. So we once again thank you for listening today. It has been definitely my honor to have Millicent Parker today with us. This is a topic that, of course, like I keep saying, we're just scratching the surface of, but it's an important topic to cover. So I'm so thankful that you were here. I'm glad that everyone had a chance to come and listen and hopefully gain some great information from our podcast today. I appreciate you being here. To everyone that listened, God bless and be well.
Yes.
Theotherapist Podcast, real talk at the intersection of theology and therapy. Check out Dr. Glenn's new journal series titled Brain Dump Journals for the Busy, available on Amazon. Visit our websites for more information at thetheotherapist.com or